Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Well, welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining us today for our SCF webinar series. My name is Joel Binstock. I'm the Manager of Origination Strategic Partnerships here at SCF, and today we're going to be discussing how we can mitigate project delays. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on how we can energize solar plus storage, and EV charging projects in the remaining months of 2022. Now let's get into what we're going to be discussing today. Because we have so many new attendees, we're going to go ahead and give a little bit of a background about sustainable capital finance. We'll also delve into the differences between a 2022 and 2023 project and the economic implications or the cost of waiting. We'll break down some of the challenges that are facing both our developer partners and financiers that are leading to project delays. And we'll discuss how we've implemented some changes into our process to improve and mitigate those project delays. Because electric vehicle charging solutions are new to the SCF suite, we'll discuss our EV charging evaluation process and how we've integrated EV charging into our broader solar plus storage solutions. Next, we'll discuss how we can best collaborate with our developer and installer partners to improve the sales process for our energy consumers. And we'll finish up with both a suite registration and a Q&A session. So if you have questions, feel free to submit them and we'll go through them at the end of the question and answer session. And if we don't get to those questions at that time, we'll upload them to the FAQ section in the SCF suite. So let's jump in. So about sustainable capital finance. SCF, simply put, is a clean energy financier. We provide capital for solar plus storage, and most recently, electric vehicle charging projects. We were founded in 2012, and we've completed over 100 distributed generation projects to date, with over $500 million earmarked for future pipeline. SCF works directly with solar developers and installer partners to provide PPA solutions to their energy consumers. Those energy consumers are typically commercial, for-profit, non-for-profit, or governmental entities. And in recent years, we've been adding those energy storage solutions, and in the last year, we've been adding electric vehicle charging solutions to the SCF suite, which is our cloud-based proprietary pricing platform. Now let's break down a difference between a 2022 and 2023 project, starting with the step down in the federal ITC. If you're not already aware, the federal ITC is going down from 26% down to 22%, and that is even after the extensions in the past. Safe harboring implies that you're able to secure 2022 ITC for a project that will energize in 2023. The IRS requires that you contribute a minimum of 5% of total project CapEx to the project in 2022, as well as complete ongoing construction progress throughout in order to secure that 2022 ITC. In addition to the step down in the ITC, we also have a change in the depreciation value. Energizing a project in 2023 drops the eligible CapEx for bonus depreciation from 100% down to 80%. In the bottom half of the screen, you could see the implications for a traditional 1 megawatt rooftop California project that's with a 25-year term and a 1% escalator. For a 2022 project capturing both the 2022 ITC as well as depreciation, indicative PPA terms come around just under 12 cents. For that exact same project with ITC value of 2023 as well as depreciation in 2023, that PPA rate is closer to 12.4 cents. The difference for this particular customer would be $500 a month. So let's break down some of the challenges that are leading to these project delays, starting with modeling iterations and revisions to financing offers. This is a common challenge across the industry because energy consumers are constantly providing feedback to their developer partners on preferences for their solar project. Those preferences are being updated to the financiers, leading to constant iterating on these projects. This has been a challenge to date, and I'll explain how the SCF suite enables for rapid iterating and simple generation of docs. Another challenge has to do with the complexity of agreements and documents. Now, with sustainable capital finance, we've added our term sheet, EPC agreement, and power purchase agreement all to the SCF suite where they can be electronically signed, allowing for a simple transaction process. The next challenge that we're going to break down has to do with supply chain constraints and the project cost increases that are stemming from that. And lastly, we'll finish up with the interconnection studies and upgrades that are across the industry determining the viability of projects. So let's identify some of the supply chain constraints that sustainable capital finance alongside our developer and installer partners have faced since the start of the pandemic, starting with modules. If you aren't aware already, there has been a tariff extension by the Biden administration for modules that was announced in February of 2022. Bifacials are excluded from the tariff extension, but challenges and price uncertainty still affects the industry. In even more recent news, the U.S. Department of Commerce has decided to pursue an investigation into several international module manufacturers regarding the circumvention of solar tariffs. And this investigation is bound to disrupt the production and supply of solar modules imported into the United States. Regardless, this investigation is still in its early stages and we should know more in the coming months. So what are some of SCF's solutions to these supply constraints? Well, the easiest one is to procure equipment earlier. And I'll go over through the next slide that SCF's simplified PPA process should enable our developer and installer partners alongside SCF to procure equipment within 30 to 45 days of initial pricing. SCF also has a very sophisticated diligence and operations team with relationships with existing vendors, so if there are vendors that you're looking to establish timely and effective equipment procurement, you can work with SCF's operations team to ensure that those timelines are met. SCF also has a list of preferred vendors on the SCF suite. If you go to the project details page, you can see a list of our approved vendors there. Last but not least, it's vital that SCF is able to collaborate with our developers in communication with the customer to share a sense of urgency and to discuss the need to achieve milestone dates in order to keep a project on schedule. Since our formation in 2012, SCF has constantly been finding ways to improve on our PPA process. The SCF team has broken down PPA conversion into a simple 8-step process that is replicable across different project types, clients, and market demographics. So let's spend some time further breaking down each step and their respective timelines, starting with indicative pricing through QuickQuote. QuickQuote is SCF's proprietary pricing calculator on the SCF suite. Projects can be entered in and calculations can be completed in as little as 30 seconds. Once viable terms are calculated via QuickQuote, a project can then be created in the SCF suite so further information can be collected for proposal generation. This process takes as little as 10 minutes and you can generate a proposal which can then be shared with the customer. At this time, you can also submit the project for review and that notifies the SCF project analyst team that a project is ready for diligence. A term sheet can be issued at this point once a preliminary design has been reviewed as well as a savings analysis completed. Once the term sheet is executed, we recommend a kickoff call with all parties to answer any questions and set up a timeline. During this process, SCF will be completing our diligence, which typically takes 1 to 2 weeks. At this time, any questions that the customer may have on the contract can be discussed and reviewed, and ultimately will lead to agreement execution in as little as 30 days. And for those of you that are interested in deploying electric vehicle charging solutions, our process is very similar and straightforward. All that has changed is that SCF's project analyst team will do additional site analysis to determine the number of chargers and the sizing for both storage and solar to maximize the revenue share offered to the customer. But besides that, the EV charging process is very similar to that of our PPA process. One of the most exciting elements to come out of 2022 has been our integrated solar plus storage plus EV charging solutions. First deploying in California, these solutions are providing incredible value to our customers while maximizing the synergies between the various components. Firstly, let's talk about the solar. So solar energy is affordable, especially when you compare it to typical fast charging rates, commonly above 30 cents per kilowatt hour. Solar energy helps curb the increased consumption of electricity from adding fast chargers to a facility. And by integrating energy storage, we can now reduce electrical demand spikes caused by fast charging several vehicles contemporaneously. The federal ITC also can be monetized for the energy storage portion of project costs as long as the energy storage is charged via the solar. The combination of these assets improve the flexibility and resiliency, particularly when future rates are uncertain. We're always looking for ways to improve our service offerings and processes. To that end, our team has requested feedback from development and installation partners, and these were the most requested improvements, starting with our EV Revenue Share proposals. Alongside our new EV charging solutions, we've introduced our revenue share proposal that can be directly provided to the customer to show project highlights, revenue share terms, and establish clear next steps. And these proposals can be generated directly from the SCF suite on the project details page. And next are the term sheets. Our simplified term sheet is 2 pages and is typically issued within 72 hours of a project being submitted. The term sheet can now be e-signed via HelloSign, and executed copies are automatically sent to all the relevant parties, which is an added benefit. One of the more exciting improvements has been expanding on our collaborative sales process, and I'll touch base on that on the next slide. Lastly, the Spring Suite update will contain several new features, including a direct upload for customer bills, financials, as well as an improved user interface. So we're pretty excited about that. So let's touch base on the collaborative sales process. SCF has learned over the years that ultimately, as the financiers behind these projects, both our installer partners and customers have to develop comfort with us walking them through the contracts, providing analyses of their annual and lifetime savings, and getting these projects ultimately energized. Historically, the SCF team would typically get involved with the customer probably around the term sheet issuance or even after execution. However, over the last 2 years of data collection, it suggests that when SCF is involved earlier with introductory calls and proposal reviews, the conversion rates increase substantially. And even during initial design, SCF has operations expertise to provide guidance on what project parameters can lead to the best savings for the customer. Well, that about wraps up the presentation portion of our webinar. Now we're going to go ahead and move forward onto the Q&A session. But if you aren't registered on the SCF suite yet, it is free to use. Simply go to suite.scf.com/register. And if you would like a personalized demo, there is a link to my colleague's schedule below. Alternatively, all you have to do is email origination@scf.com, and we'll go ahead and get that coordinated for you. So with that, let's go ahead and move over to the questions and answers.
We always seem to get this question, but what states are we active in? So California and Arizona are our largest 2 markets to date, with New Jersey close third, apologies. And we are continuously growing in the Midwest as well as the Northeast corridor. Unfortunately, in the Southeast, we're tending to see still some utility restrictions that are prohibitive. For example, Florida still remains a market that we cannot support. So yeah, that's a great question. One question is, do you have information available for our EV solutions? Yeah, so we have a 1-pager that is available on the SCF suite. My colleagues will also be able to share that with you after this. So we'll go ahead and share that 1-pager, but we also have additional webinars that we've completed with regards to that are a little bit more in depth with regards to our integrated EV charging solutions with solar plus storage. So unfortunately, it looks like we have a message from an international developer. And so unfortunately, we do not develop projects outside of the United States at this time. If you are looking for financing, that you might have to look elsewhere for that. So apologies. So in terms of, this is a great question with regards to the markets in the Midwest. So you're looking at Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. So in general, the challenge that the solar industry has faced in those markets to date have largely been around the avoided cost, or what we call the cost of power. Utility rates in those markets are anywhere typically between 5 and 11 cents per kilowatt hour. And a lot of those markets that I listed before, like Indiana, others have very limited, if any, incentives that will help support project financing in those markets. So to get a PPA, we do need to offer some portion of savings. And so typically those markets are cost prohibitive for developers so that they cannot essentially meet their internal hurdle rates while making sure that the customer generates savings. I have a question about electric vehicle charging. So is our EVC software capable of changing charge rates in line with time of use? So that's a great question. So firstly, let me clarify, we do not have our own EV charging deployment software. We would be using third-party software providers for that. However, with utilizing a battery management system alongside your energy storage, you will have control over modifying rates, and that is a capability provided by EV charging networks as a pretty big standard, that you will be able to modify rates based off of time of use. But that's a great question. Is SCF a one-stop shop for solutions for developers and EPC partners to meet with all the documentation required for US standards? So in terms of I think the broader question is, yes, we provide 100% of the capital needed to develop these particular projects through a milestone disbursement schedule that's paid up through the EPC agreement. We do not require our energy consumers to provide any capital throughout the entire build. Essentially, as our PPAs work, once the system is energized and the customer starts receiving benefits, that is when they'll start receiving invoices for their monthly PPA payments. We have a question with regards to fuel cells. So in terms of new technologies, SCF has the capabilities to explore and evaluate new technologies. The key factors are going to be, what are the spec sheets, what are the warranties, and what's the length of operating history, and what's the track record, right? So if we can get that information, we should be able to make a better assessment of if that technology is viable for this particular project. But the SCF suite does not have the capabilities of adding in new technologies like fuel cells or flywheels or other types of energy products. So those would likely have to be manually evaluated. But like I said, we would still need to capture a lot of information pertaining to their letter of warranty, et cetera. So this is a great question about essentially the Midwest savings that I kind of discussed earlier, how there's a very kind of limited savings for power purchase agreements, but we know that electricity rates are rising over time. So what does that mean for PPAs? Well, that's a great question. So typically our power purchase agreements include some form of escalator, annual escalator. That's an annual escalator that is applied to the base power purchase agreement rate year over the life of the term. And so we typically utilize an escalator no greater than 2.5%, and that helps to account for some of that utility inflation in future years. So when you go to the SCF suite and you'll enter in a project through a quick quote, you'll see that you're able to enter in an annual escalator. And so we highly recommend you explore utilizing what we call a fixed rate PPA, which means a 0% escalator, or to add an escalator into the calculation as well. And what that does is, by adding an annual escalator, you're generating more PPA revenue over time, and you're really accounting for that utility inflation. And so that helps generate more revenue. It makes the project stronger. So you're typically able to offer a lower initial PPA rate than if you were to say offer a PPA with a 0% escalator. And speaking of the Midwest again, with regards to electric vehicle charging solutions, currently on the SCF suite, we do only have California local incentives modeled for electric vehicle charging solutions. So for any other project, we're exploring a lot down the Eastern corridor. We will absolutely be able to evaluate those. Likely we will require essentially manual evaluation. And that goes with a lot of cases with these electric vehicle charging solutions because there's so many nuanced local incentives at the city or county level that may or may not be applicable to various project types. We do get this question pretty regularly, but can we include roof repairs as a portion of the total project? So the short answer is yes, right? So as a solar financier, we will only support a power purchase agreement or solar installation on a roof that has a long roof life, right? And so we're going to ensure that the roof condition meets our standards. So if there are repairs that are needed, we can absolutely support them. However, we typically cannot support an entire roof replacement in our project costs. And one of the reasons I like to explain with regards to roof replacements is we don't own the roof, right? So there is no recourse in the event that they default on a power purchase agreement. So that's why most third-party financiers will have challenges financing projects that include significant roof costs or roof replacements. But once again, that's a case-by-case basis, and you can work directly with one of our project managers to help make sure that we're claiming the right ITC eligibility basis for a particular project. Regarding the simplified PPA process, what is the total time required from the initial analysis stage to COD, as in like total time to complete a project? Well, that's a great question. And the short answer is it's going to vary, right? So we have smaller 250 kilowatt solar projects that can typically get installed in several weeks. We have larger 1 megawatt plus projects that may take closer to a month to 2 months. And if there's additional complexities with regards to interconnection studies, upgrades, those can add a lot of time. And then from an energy consumer perspective, the approval process that the energy consumer has to go through. So we'll review their bylaws and make sure we understand and we're doing the proper approval method for their particular projects. And to ensure that the authorized signatory is indeed the name on the power purchase agreement. So that will help assess essentially the timeline. And one of the challenges with regards to extending timelines, particularly has to do with approval processes for boards. So if a board is meeting once every quarter, that can help that could lead to some certain challenges. And SCF has some experience working with those types of entities to help work around virtual meetings to help circumvent some of those delays. Is there a field in the SCF suite where you can enter in the local EV charging incentives we have discovered? So we currently have that feature on the test suite. We are trying to assess essentially what incentive structures to add in based off of kind of what we've experienced in the California markets. So that should be going live in the next month or so. But that's a great question. I see a question about projects in North Carolina. Unfortunately, under Duke territory, there are essentially no third-party ownership structures allowed. In this case, power purchase agreements. You can secure a PPA directly with Duke territory. The terms are particularly not favorable. However, there are rural electrical municipal co-ops, or REMCs, that are able to secure direct PPAs with third-party owners. Those terms tend to be slightly more favorable, but there are limited opportunities for those types of solar projects. So the short story is unfortunately, North Carolina tends to be a market where it's mostly cost prohibitive and just limiting from a third-party ownership standpoint. And once again, all these questions will be uploaded to the SCF suite in the FAQ session. So if I don't get to your question, I do apologize. I'm trying to scroll through this little module. For the EVC revenue share, how is it decided and what software do we use for the charge rate? So we can use various software providers for the actual implementation of those installs. We're essentially hardware and software agnostic. However, we will want to make sure that we assume the appropriate asset management costs that are unique. So we do have existing relationships with several EVC network providers that have kind of this asset management rates. So that would be how we essentially have the capabilities to modify the rates with time of use and adjust accordingly. And from a modeling perspective, we're using our own internal model to assess usage rates, total usage, unavailability losses, and that sort of information. Is there a limit in size? So just kind of a broader general question about the systems that system sizes that SCF finances. So typically the smallest solar project standalone that we'll finance is about 250 kilowatts for solar. Now with EV charging, we're seeing that there's a lot of unique scenarios that can't support 200 kW of solar. It might be space constrained, a little fast food shop that might only have room for 80 kW. We are still going to want to explore integrating as much solar as possible because of that energy rate arbitrage that we are completing using energy storage. So 250 kilowatts is relatively on the small side. Our average single size install for 2022 is closer to about 1 megawatt, just under, I believe. And then the largest single site installs that we're typically evaluating are anywhere from 10 to 20 megawatts. So anything over that utility scale, we're typically not involved. Our equity investor NextEra typically handles those particular types of projects, but we're focused really on distributed generation. For the most case, really anywhere from 250 kW to about 10 megawatts. Can I send the information with regards to the suite login? So I'll go back to the previous page if possible. If not, you just have to go to suite.scf.com/register. My colleague, Matt Brown, will also be reaching out to see if you want to schedule a demo. I had that calendar on the previous slide, but yeah, we should be able to get you essentially a live demo with one of our colleagues, hopefully Matt. And afterwards, you register on the SCF suite. There are no subscription fees. We essentially make our money by converting on power purchase agreements. So the more users and the more projects that we're completing through the SCF suite, the better our terms can be. So we should be able to get you registered and activated in no time. Okay, so I believe I covered most of the questions. So we really appreciate you taking the time today. I know we're running a little bit over, but so thank you all for attending. We'll follow up and there will be a recording. So if you're interested in seeing this or sharing it with your colleague, feel free to do so. So with that, thanks again. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care.